Imagine also being a renowned AI expert, responding to, contributing to and benefiting from one of the most profound changes which we are beginning to go through, perhaps over the last 40 years. Imagine positing a future of disruption. Of course, everyone says that about AI, but really, imagine also the significant opportunity for entrepreneurs. Well, imagine no more. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our first EntreConf keynote speaker, the founder of a now $2.2 billion valued business, Nigel Toon from Graphcore. Nigel. Okay. You all right, sir?
Yes, indeed.
Yes, indeed. Now, let's just check your mic is working. Can we just do one?
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. It's quite nice being in a cinema, isn't it? It's quite civilized. So tell us.
I pity the poor photographers because the lighting on us is probably quite poor. So.
Well, if any of the poor photographers wish in a non-intrusive way to come forward and take pics in close-up, we'll pretend they're not there. Is that right?
Absolutely.
We'll do that. So tell us, in a nutshell, really, Graphcore is a business, what you do, and a little bit about why you do it.
So Graphcore is an AI company, as you have pointed out, but perhaps different from OpenAI, which you may have heard of, or some of the other software-based AI companies. We're actually building the hardware that runs AI, so we have built a new kind of microprocessor to accelerate artificial intelligence.
Is that the IPU?
We call it the IPU. So you may have heard of CPUs that go inside your laptop that are good at running all kinds of desktop apps and websites. You may have heard of GPUs, which are good for graphics, and people have started to use those for AI. NVIDIA has become, on the back of their success with AI, has become the most valuable semiconductor company, worth $1 trillion. I think I need to put my pinky in the corner of my mouth when I say that.
Maybe that was yesterday. Maybe it oscillates, perhaps. Who knows?
So I work on the basis that if we can be worth 10 or 20% of NVIDIA, we're doing quite well.
Doing off the scale quite well. I mean, you started as a business maybe 10, 12 years ago, something like that?
Yeah, officially the company was started 7 years ago. So
right.
We've been working on it a little bit before that, but officially 7 years ago. We've raised $750 million, sorry, I was talking dollars, in venture capital and funding for the business. So initially from VCs and then later from sort of larger investors who you would typically find investing in public market companies. And we have about 450 people in the company. The headquarters is here in Bristol. We have an office in Cambridge, Cambridge, UK, a small office in London. We have an office in Gdansk in Poland, where we do some additional sort of cloud type work. And we have offices in the US and around the world for selling to customers. And we have quite a big office actually in China. We have about 70 people in China, which is a market that has worked very well for us.
Well, we'll come on to the running of that business, an increasingly complex business. But I just want to take you back to what I think was the founding meeting, which is actually at the Marlborough Pub. And Joe Cousins, the owner of the Marlborough, is here. There he is. There's Joe. The Marlborough Pub in Bath, and that was 2012 maybe.
Yeah.
Which what was that first meeting like? It was a business colleague you've worked with previously. What's your background prior to that point?
So a long time ago, I was an engineer, electronics engineer. I was very fortunate to work for a US chip company. When I joined, there was about 100 people in the company. It went public. It grew to employ a few thousand people, became worth $20 billion.
It just says that idly, $20 billion.
I ended up running the international business, which was about 25% of the company's overall business. So I've been doing that for 14 years and really enjoyed it, but thought it was time to do something on my own. And so together with 3 other people in 2002, we set up a company also in Bristol, where we built and grew another chip company that we ended up selling to NVIDIA, actually now our competitor, for about $500 million. And after the sale of that business, I was helping some VCs on a business that they invested in, and they wanted some help. We ended up selling that company. And at that time, just as I was selling that business, and my now co-founder of Graphcore, and was a co-founder in our previous company, Icera, he was just in the process of leaving NVIDIA. We sat down in the Marlborough Tavern over lunch, a rather long lunch.
Yeah, service is terrible, isn't it? Yeah. No, I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. Big fan.
And we basically were talking about some of the things we might do next, and we saw the cloud coming. This new thing called AI was just emerging. So this was back in 2012.
That's pretty foresighted. And was that did you have how clear was the plan at that point? What were you seeking to achieve or believing you could achieve at that point?
Well, this room's full of entrepreneurs. I don't think you ever have a completely clear plan, and if you do, you're probably going to go wrong. I always think it's a bit like wandering around in the fog, and occasionally you'll bump into things, and you're going to make a decision about which way you go from that point. And then after you're successful, you'll sit back and you'll post-rationalize all the amazing decisions that you made that got you to become successful versus the people who maybe took a wrong turn or whatever, and you always ignore those ones. So you can't foresee. What you probably can do is see there's a big opportunity here. We have some of the skills that will allow us to do this. We know others who have the other skills that we need. We've got experience of running companies. We can raise the capital that's needed. We've raised, as I said, $750 million, and we're probably not done. This is a massive, massive lift that we're doing. It's basically impossible, but we're having a go.
Yeah. It's almost back to the principle of dreaming. It's positing a reality which doesn't yet necessarily exist, but you're going to help achieve it, deliver it.
I think that what they've found is that in DNA, there is a DNA strand that is linked to optimism. And some people have the optimist gene, and other people don't.
And let me guess where you are on that.
Way off the scale.
Yeah.
So, I think generally, to be an entrepreneur, you probably need that optimist gene. You need to be able to think that you can change the world. I think Steve Jobs called it the distortion reality field. You bend it to your will. So I think that's something that everybody in this room probably has a piece of.
And what about at any stage? I mean, however profound the plan is and experienced the people are and great the capital is, et cetera, things don't always go to plan. Talk through.
Very rarely. Yeah.
Talk through an example where something has not gone to plan and you've either pivoted or bounced back from it. That resilience and bounce back ability factor.
We're without revealing too many secrets, we're probably in the middle of that at the moment.
Would you like to reveal some of the secrets?
So, Ukraine war. Capital markets collapsed. We were very lucky. We had raised $250 million just prior at a $2.8 billion post-money valuation. But it became clear quite quickly that it would be difficult to repeat that. And we were going to have to change in terms of the rate at which we were investing in the technology, the number of people that we were looking to hire. We needed to conserve our cash. When we raised the 250, we still had 100 odd million in the bank. So over the last 2 years, nearly now, we've been much more cautious in terms of the rate at which we can expand and the rate at which we grow. And then right in the middle of all of that, which is something that we knew was coming, but probably didn't anticipate the level of interest that it would drive, is these much larger AI models, GPT-3 and now GPT-4. And that puts certain strains and requirements on the hardware as well. So we already had a roadmap to support that. And what we've been trying to do is sort of, on the one hand, not spend as much money, and on the other hand, accelerate. That's kind of, we're in the middle of all of that. Yeah.
Can I come to a personal thing, which is, what is it like being you? you're running this business, a complex business, complex geographically. You mentioned the different offices, and that's one prosaic way in some ways to look at it. Complex in terms of how you are trying to effect change, to accelerate the process of innovation, the fundraising on that side, the obligations to those who have funded you so far. How do you navigate that process? What's it like riding a unicorn as well as running a unicorn?
It's probably not much different from running any business, I think. The CEO of this chip company that I joined when I was quite young, a guy called Rodney Smith, sadly died. I was once having a conversation with him along the same lines of what's it like being the CEO? And he pointed out to me, the job of a CEO is to do nothing. What you need to be doing is having a team of people who's doing all of the work and covering all of the bases. You will never achieve doing nothing, but what you do is you focus in on the areas where there's a new strategy required or there's a new person required. You're just constantly fixing the problems to try and always attempt to reach that state where you're doing nothing. And obviously there's far too many things to do, and you've got to constantly prioritize. So I always have a list of my to-dos, and then I have a list of my sort of objectives that I'm trying to achieve. And I'm trying to balance between the two, because there's always the sort of the short-term urgent stuff that you're trying to do, but you've got to keep a view of that long-term strategic stuff that you need to get done. Am I making progress towards these longer-term objectives as well? Am I talking to enough investors? Because you're always trying to warm people up for the next funding. Am I talking to my competitors? Am I talking to enough customers? There's always that sort of strategic stuff that you need to be doing and making progress towards those longer term objectives. And that's getting that balance right often is hard, especially when there's lots of fires that you're trying to fight. So the key is, can I get somebody else to do that, and I can focus on some of these longer term things.
And from where do you get advice and indeed advisors that any business, certainly of scale, but any business benefits from outside perspectives, the critical friend in both respects of those terms? Who are your advisors? Who do you most value?
Well, I overheard some of the previous talk, and I think it's quite interesting, isn't it? If you look at, as a small company, how do I get really good professional advisors, accountants, lawyers, etc. Because if you're going to build a big business, you need those people. And in the same way that you might pitch to an investor, you're pitching to those people as well and say, you're going to work for me, I'm not going to pay you very much, but I'm going to be a big client in the future. And luckily, having had a track record of building some businesses, we've got a very strong legal team, we've got patent attorneys, we've got leading accounting firms that are supporting us. So in terms of the professional advisors, we're in good shape. We're paying them lots of money now, but we didn't at the beginning. And then in terms of working, I've been very lucky in having a few people, that I guess you would describe as mentors. So one is a chap called Robin Saxby, who was the original CEO of a company called Arm. And Robin and I get together probably at least 2 times a year, and we sit down over a nice cold glass of wine, and we talk about stuff. And when you're going through things, he's the phone a friend person, and he'll never give you the answer, but you can talk it through with them in a safe space, and just the conversation, the questions they ask will allow you to think about what the answers are. So having those people that you can sort of call up and have those because sometimes it's hard to do even with your own team, because it's like you on your own, and you need to sort of show a certain level of face, and you don't want to show that you're unclear always about what's going on. So finding somebody outside the business who you can talk things through with, you're not looking for them to tell you the answer, but you need a sounding board to talk things through.
And to help shape the thinking. And
absolutely, yeah. And if I can't describe it to you, then I need to do more work to think about how it works and what the problem is.
I want to come to a current sort of macro position for Graphcore, which is to do with taxation, the siren voices of American investors saying, either relocate in part or in whole, because the tax breaks under the Biden administration are now so profound that the value gain is potentially huge. How are you navigating that, and at what level are you talking in the UK politically? You may choose not to go into the second one. By the way, do you want a cup of coffee or something?
No, I'm good.
I'm going to grab my coffee, so excuse me. Yeah.
Keeping him awake. It's a challenge, obviously. It's bizarre, isn't it? So 2000 is a long-winded answer. I apologize.
That's okay.
2002, China joins the World Trade Organization and starts to become a manufacturing hub for a lot of the world. And we go into a phase through the 2000s of globalization, particularly in tech. Tech is probably the most globally disintegrated business supply chain that you can possibly imagine. And then 2008 financial crisis hits, followed a few years later by COVID, and the political spectrum switches from globalization is good, it's more productive, it's good that we're seeing China bring people out of poverty, et cetera, to a world now where China's bad, the rhetoric is all bad. By the way, a lot of that is actually coming from Taiwan rather than from the US, so it's Taiwan shaking the pot, is something people should be aware of. And we're in a very different universe. And so what happens in those environments is you get this much more protectionist approach. And how do you deliver a protectionist approach? You put incentives on the table. And that's what the US is doing. It's what Europe is doing. China has always been operating in that mode. And UK, having left the European Union probably at completely the wrong time, as the world moves away from globalization towards much more protectionist measures, is kind of out on a limb from that point of view. And so I've been fortunate to sit on the Prime Minister's Business Council, came off recently. Very frustrating process, especially watching the revolving door of prime ministers coming through. Number 10.
I was going to say, which prime minister?
I had 3.
Well done.
I sit on the board of something called UKRI, which is the UK Research and Innovation, which I'm passionate about because I think the UK has some of the best research and some of the greatest innovation, and we don't fund it enough. We don't support it enough. We spend on research about half of what Germany does, a third of what South Korea does, and as a result, we don't have a Samsung. How did Samsung come about? Samsung was British technology from a company called TTP.com that was funded by a Korean government research organization called ETRI, working together with Samsung and LG to build the first GSM mobile phones. And from that base, Samsung built the mobile phone industry and became, a massive player in that. And it was a government-led, government-driven process to try and do that. And I'm not advocating necessarily that we should do that per se, but this sort of laissez-faire, we can't step forward and interfere, we shouldn't have an industrial policy, I think is wrong.
Well, one might argue that if ever there was proof of the need for big government, it was the pandemic. Sometimes governments are the only people who can step in on the bigger picture to make stuff happen.
Yeah,
and there's the strategic approach.
And that process worked because actually government did take a step back and did allow some key people to get in, drive change, make things happen quickly. So, but unfortunately, we haven't learned from that.
Talking of change and making stuff happen, AI. let's open the discussion out to sectors. All the talk at this stage is around two areas, not directly within your world, but more generally, between regulation, that humanity is going to be redefined and changed for the worse, and therefore we need to control it, try controlling the wind. And then also the disruption, that it's going to destroy jobs, and that's a bad thing, that's right. Talk to those if you wish, but really talk about the opportunities that AI might bring to multiple different sectors as represented here today.
So, probably the thing most people are aware of is this whole concept of generative AI that has burst into the sort of public debate. Really, OpenAI launched ChatGPT at the very end of November last year, so really December, 100 million users by the end of January. Microsoft includes it in a version of it in Bing. They launched GPT-4, and it will write a bedtime story for you, for your children. Give it a few things that your children like, and it will write a very good bedtime story for you, or a nursery rhyme, or it will, the wonderful example that I saw, a heavily autistic gardener, brilliant at gardening, unable to write a response for customers, but he can put together some prompts and it will write very coherent communications to his customers, allowing him to win new business and, communicate properly with his customers. So amazing capability. And it's this idea that it will generate, the AI will generate new things, which we all find incredibly scary.
Yeah, that's inherent in any technological change. It's sort of the fear of the new, and people focus on the negative.
It's actually
sometimes
part of a survival mechanism, because as children, what we, this goes back to sort of early sort of philosophical thinking. There's this idea of we look for animism in everything, because we see an object and we're trying to work out, is it going to eat us? Can I eat it? Is it going to run away? And every, as a child, every child is looking for animism in objects. It will poke things to see if it moves of its own accord. Artificialism is often what we find. It's a rock or something that doesn't respond. But our first reaction is always to think it's an animated object of some kind. It might eat us. And it's an inbuilt mechanism that we have to help us survive. And so when we see artificial intelligence, we think, oh, there's something in it. It's conscious. It's going to take over. It's going to run away out of control. The reality is, it is a method that it learns from information to help us solve problems that we couldn't easily solve on our own. And the point about the generative AI is not that it generates things, it's the fact that you can write the program. Normally with a computer, you have to tell the computer what to do step by step in a very complicated program. There are about 24 million software programmers on the planet, very small percentage of the total world population. Now, with AI, everybody can be a computer programmer. Everybody can tell the computer what to do, because you can talk to it in a human language. We can describe in a simple way what it is you want it to do, and it is clever enough to respond to your instructions and to do your bidding. And so as long as we make sure that it does actually do our bidding, which is where the regulation needs to come in, we have a tool that will completely transform most businesses. Think about how, as a small company, you start on your own, you're doing all this work, and then need to hire somebody to do these things that I don't want to spend my time doing. Well, in some cases, you'll be able to offload that to an AI. And so you'll probably end up, will you employ less people? Perhaps. Will the people do more interesting, creative jobs? Absolutely. So, we are in a transition where businesses will be massively impacted by AI. And those that actually take advantage of it, will do incredibly well.
It's like any form of technology that, from the abacus to bookkeeping to spreadsheets, there's a process of checking financial work, and the technology takes out elements of grunt, but also can help, in that particular case, posit what-if scenarios that Graham and others have talked about.
Imagine, you're sitting in the cave, doing some pictures on the wall and working out how to light a fire. And somebody comes home and they brought a wolf with them.
A what?
A wolf. and they say, look, I'm going to train this animal to help me hunt for food. And people will shout, oh, no, it's going to eat me. Or, oh, it's going to eat all the food. And, oh, it's going to take my job. It's exactly the same. Going, I think that was 14,000 years ago that first happened. So, we have, as humans, we have applied tools and used tools to take us far beyond our basic ability. We can fly, for good's sake. It's an amazing. We've done an amazing things.
And you say 14,000 years ago. In 1400s, of course, was the Gutenberg press, and in many ways, that's the most profound piece of technology, which did entirely change the way in which the world worked. Do you think AI? Where do you rank AI potentially? You're trying to look forward 3-5 years time, 10-15 years time. Is AI this fourth generation of technology that follows the personal computer, the internet, social media, and now this is going to be transformative to all of these businesses? Or is it another iteration?
I pick out 3. So the first was fire. The ability to create energy, outside of the energy that we just naturally consume. And there's a theory that says fire allows food to be consumed much more quickly and for us to get much more energy from the food that we eat when it's cooked. And there was a process from early Homo species learning how to use fire to Homo sapiens, where our brains doubled in size. And that created for us, who we are today, and it was basically fire that allowed that. The second was engines. So, the early engines, which really started with wind power and water power, and then actual combustion engines, and now electricity, allowed us to have strength beyond our natural capability.
And go at speeds which are not otherwise
Go
capable.
at speeds, fly, all of these things.
Yeah.
And AI is of the same order, where it will now augment our human intelligence. It will allow us to go to a new level of intelligence, will solve problems that we previously couldn't solve. And people say, oh, but it will learn how to create new forms of AI, and it will run away out of control and create this thing called a singularity. I was quoted recently in the Financial Times as saying that was bollocks.
The FT printed bollocks.
They did print bollocks.
Yes. The quote, not the fact. Yeah.
And what it will allow us to do potentially is to create new forms of computing. Semiconductors are great, but ultimately are going to draw too much power. Ultimately, to build the next generation, at some point in the future, the next generation of computers, we will build molecular computers. We don't know how to do that yet, but maybe AI will help us understand how proteins and molecules interact, and will allow us to build, in the future, molecular computers which are far more power efficient and far more powerful than we build with semiconductors today.
Transformation ahoy. Let's open the questions out to the audience. Sherry Ann at the front. Can we bring a mic to the front? And can I also see another hand for a second question as well? And then to gentlemen 3 rows back in the middle-ish.
Maybe the second question, you can hold their hands up.
Yeah, that's right.
So
So if we get a mic
microphone can
here as well, please. If we've got a second mic. Anyway, yeah, Sherry Ann.
Hi,
Yeah.
Nigel. That was really
And
interesting.
could you say your company?
Oh,
Sherry,
yeah,
by the way?
Sherry Ann from Unividual. We are a financial advice business. So when you're running an organisation that's breaking technological barriers and is extremely innovative, and then you couple that with consumer fear, how do you manage the brand and who you are as a company, and making sure you don't get wrapped up in that negative narrative?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of people talking about that. There's a lot of concern around that. Reputational risk, is everywhere. We're doing a reasonable amount of business in China, for example. We're working within all the export controls. We're only working with the internet companies there. But there's reputational risk potentially associated with that. But I've been going to China for 30 years, and it's really interesting. You look around the world. In the US government has basically said corporations will govern AI. In China has said the government will regulate AI. And in Europe, we're kind of saying we'll just throw lots of regulation at it. And the risk is that we in Europe will fall behind because we're regulating too much. We're not allowing innovation to run ahead, and China and the US will race ahead and leave us in the dust. And you've recently seen a spate of people putting their hand up and saying, oh, you must regulate us. You must, Greg Altman from OpenAI, as an example, Microsoft, Google. Why are they doing that? They're doing that because they are ahead. And what they want to do is they want to say, regulate us. We'll tell you how to regulate us.
And pull up the drawbridge.
And then they can hold back, others. So always be suspicious of corporations saying regulate us because they're doing it for their own purposes. What would you prefer? Would you prefer Chinese government to be in control of AI or Google and Meta to be in charge of AI? I don't know. Europe is probably right that the people should be in charge of AI and how it works. The problem is that people don't know enough about how AI works to be able to really have an informed debate. It's things like you want AI to know how it came up with an answer, and you want that to be explainable, how it came up with an answer. Well, I don't know your position, but imagine you meet somebody, they're going to be your life partner for the rest of your life. Can you explain the decision process that you go through? Can you unravel the whole process that caused you to decide that that person was the person you're going to spend the rest of your life with? I doubt it. We make probabilistic decisions. As Alan Turing said, if you expect a machine to be intelligent, it will make mistakes. And we all make mistakes. And, judging by how many people get divorced, that big important decision, lots of people get wrong. We have to accept the fact that the AI machines might make mistakes, and what we've got to do is think about the impact that it might have. How do we protect the people that will use that machine? How do we ensure that they don't get hurt? Children make mistakes all the time. It's how they learn. They learn from experience, and we just try to create an environment where they don't kill themselves, hopefully. Sometimes they break their legs, they fall off their bikes, they do all this stuff, but they're learning through the experience. And so somehow we need to create an environment where the machines can continue to learn, innovators can continue to innovate, but where we have enough controls in place it's not the machine that's the problem, it's the people that create the machine, and it's the people that use the machines or use it inappropriately. Those are the people we need to regulate.
Thank you. There's a question in the 3 rows back. Do you have the mic? Yeah.
Yes. Is this on? Yeah.
Go for it.
Hi, my name's Graham. I run a company called Jitty. We use AI to index the property market around the UK and then give people like a nice, easy way to query that, basically. I'm curious, so obviously I think your industry is one, or this industry is one where there's loads of uncertainty about the future, both for your future customers and where they'll be building, as well as you mentioned the molecular chips and things like that, processes. I'm curious as to how you approach that level of uncertainty. Is it a case of placing lots of little bets and then doubling down, or do you take a more opinionated approach where you think this is definitely the way forward and you kind of put everything into that? How do you approach that uncertainty?
Yeah, you've got to separate sort of long term from shorter term. And any business, even with the capital that we've raised, you have to put all your wood behind one arrow. Really important. Don't try and spread bet. That's not entrepreneurship. It's like if it fails, I think the Dakota Native Americans have a saying for this. They say, if horse is dead, get off, go find another horse.
What
Do
wise
not kick
words.
horse. Do not try to carry horse. Do not, all the stuff that as business people we're sometimes prone to do. So put all your wood behind one arrow, try and make it work. If it doesn't work, get off and go find another horse. And that's what you've got to try and do, I think, is you've got to think short term, focus on what's going to come next, how I think the founders of Spotify said it best. The value of a business is the sum of the problems you solve for your customers. And I think that's right. Think about what problem, constantly ask yourself, what problem am I solving for my customer? What problem am I solving for my customer? In our case, it's we're giving them an alternative to NVIDIA, a better alternative to NVIDIA. And that's somehow what you've got to focus on that short term. And yeah, you can think about the long term and have some nice talks down the Marlborough Tavern about that. But the key is, focus on those short-term issues.
This session has absolutely flown by. I've got 2 last questions, and I think we will have to wrap at this point. So actually, okay, I'll take one more at the very back. I'll ask one of my 2, and then we'll come to yours in a sec. So tell us this, the tech world, of course, is littered with companies that have built scale, but then have been disintermediated or broken by smaller startups. How does Graphcore, as a business, maintain its innovative focus, that it constantly reinvents, recreates, anticipates, drives?
So this is Robin Saxby. I'll give him the credit for it. So Robin Saxby, when they started ARM is the microprocessor that's inside your phone, if you don't know the company. You draw a SWOT. Internal strengths and weaknesses, external opportunities and threats, and you write them all down. And as a startup, what you do is you ignore all the weaknesses, because you've got far too many of those. Focus on the strengths. And far too many threats, so ignore them. Focus on the biggest opportunity and pick one. So put your strengths behind the big opportunity, and what I call the Italian rule of driving applies. You don't need a rear view mirror, because whatever's behind you doesn't matter. Just go faster. Sorry if I'm offended any Italians in the audience.
Just go faster. And that you can imagine what the culture of Graphcore is like. So gentleman at the back, please.
Hi, Nathan Barnowski from Digital Wonder Lab. I was really struck by your thought around kids poking and how they poke technology and how they poke animated objects. I'm really shocked. I've got a 6-year-old son, and I'm really struck by how primary education doesn't really teach anything different than it has for the last 30 years, really. So thinking, if you yourself were a 6-year-old lad at school, what would your hopes be for the future, knowing where the future is going with AI?
Yeah, I was a very bad 6-year-old at school, because I'm dyslexic, so I struggled to learn to read. So I've written a book, which is coming out in February next year. We're still stuck in the 1400s in publishing a book, so it takes a long time. But education, this concept of the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic, even misspelt, is just wrong. We've got to move to a world of helping people to understand how to be creative, creativity. Helping people to understand how to be curious, to go off and investigate. I always think a university degree is not something that teaches you a skill, it teaches you how to learn, how to be curious. That's what it should be. It should teach you how to be curious. And then the final one is critical analysis, which we do far too little of, social media and all the rest of it. We have to be able to look at the facts that are being presented in front of us and decide which are correct and which are not. And that's what education needs to be for young people. And AI is going to have a massive impact on education, because, in China today, people entering school, they have an AI system which, they draw the very difficult Chinese characters. The AI system is telling them when they get it right, when they get it wrong. There's all kinds of, animations and things that make it friendly. The ones who are good at it can race ahead. The ones who are, find it a bit more difficult, they can repeat. They can go at their own pace. Teachers can intervene, when required. But, it isn't this kind of rigorous classroom reading, writing, arithmetic process, which we've fallen into the trap of. It's a much more individual, creative, curious, critical thinking type of education that we need to lead towards.
Very good. I'm afraid we are out of time. Got one last, which is to the audience here. If you mentioned being a 6-year-old, if you were a 20 or 30 something, maybe with a reasonable amount of time, maybe not a huge amount of money, how would you be looking at AI as an opportunity? Maybe there's some earlier stage businesses here. Where would you focus?
So, in the Dark Ages, before the Gutenberg press, we wrote on vellum. And writing was kind of preserved for the most educated people, in monasteries or legal profession, and because paper was there was no paper, it was vellum, and it was so expensive, and there was so little written, and that's probably why they call it the Dark Ages. Software's kind of the same. Today, software engineers are like those monks in monasteries writing on vellum. They're like, very clever people who are creating these programs that run on computers. And so you're all thinking, I'm going to tell my child to become a software engineer. AI will change software. AI will allow anybody to create computers that do what they need. So what they need to focus on is, other areas, microbiology, artistic, because even though a machine might be able to create a picture, it can't discern whether that picture is actually any good or not. We still need creativity. We still need, philosophical thought. The arts and humanities are as important as science and STEM subjects, in my opinion, and pushing people down these narrow roads of programming. Yes, some people will still need to program, but we need to be able to think about how can we use these machines to solve these next big problems.
And AI, if it doesn't redefine what it is to be human, it certainly puts the emphasis, as you've been saying, on curiosity, creativity, and critical thinking. It frees the grunt, I guess, is part of what you're saying, such that the value add of the visionary, and there's many visionaries here, those who are able to drive companies and ideas, because that you have that power behind you. You don't need to be a programmer, because creativity in that respect is also control.
So you all put together your financial spreadsheets, you're doing that stuff. In the 1970s, you would have done that with a pencil and a rubber and a calculator. And you'd have to go through the whole sheet, working out, I change this number, how does that change all these other numbers on the spreadsheet? Spreadsheets complete.
Can we have some physical assistance rather than artificial assistance?
The spreadsheets completely changed that. There are now many more accountants doing good work at a business level, many more people in the accountancy field because of spreadsheets, and the spreadsheets took away the grunt of doing that work. And AI is kind of the same. It will take away, I think it will increase employment. It will certainly disrupt employment, and that's going to be really difficult. We'll need lots of retraining. But ultimately, it will free people to do more interesting, more creative, more exciting roles, which is why we need young people to be able to actually benefit and use this technology.
Talking of accountants who are free to do more exciting roles, that's our second keynote with Zilla Bing-Thorne, who trained as an accountant, became a CFO, but actually always wanted to be a CEO. We'll be coming on to that after lunch. For now, I'm going to say thank you ever so much to Nigel Toon of Graphcore on your behalf. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Nigel, if I don't want to bounce you live, but if at any stage you wish we should explore your book when it's published eventually in March or some such, if we might have an EntreConf session around that, I think it'd be absolutely fascinating. We would love that indeed. And also thank you to David and the visa office as well. And thanks for your questions.